With the global tariff war now in full swing, the question of who's strong enough to handle another serious economic downturn is worth considering. Some nations with massive debts, courtesy of the COVID disruption, haven't seen enough economic growth to regain a strong footing since then. There's also currencies, with Donald Trump, as we've said, seeking a lower US dollar to boost trade. Though with the flight to safety with recessionary fears, the opposite has happened so far. One of the best placed people in the world to think about all this is Paul Sheard, former Vice Chairman and Chief Economist of S&P Global, and author of the Wall Street Journal best-selling book, The Power of Money. He's in Tokyo today speaking about all this, and he joins me now. Paul, always great to chat to you. Can I just start with that issue about who is strongest and capable of withstanding a global economic downturn right now?
Thanks, Ross, and it's great to be with you as well. Well, I don't think anybody would particularly like that kind of prospect. Nobody would do particularly well. But just, big picture, I think there is a kind of an asymmetry here, which is the US, in a sense, is better placed than the rest of the world. Not only is it the kind of the biggest, most strongest, most dynamic economy, but the adjustments that need to be made on the US side are in some sense smaller than the adjustments that need to be made in its trading partners. So if you looked at a country like Japan, for example, their deficit with the US relative GDP is probably around about 1.5%. But the surplus, obviously, the Japanese surplus, but the deficit from the US side is only about 0.2% of their GDP. So that's a kind of an inherent asymmetry. And you also have the fact that, coming out of the global financial crisis and then most recently coming out of the COVID recession, the US has really pretty much had the best performance. So Europe has lagged in particular. If I were to single out particular economies, I think it would probably be, China and maybe Germany and some of the major European economies. China obviously has been struggling with its own kind of slowdown and real estate woes, and it's, of course, most heavily exposed to the US through its exports and trade imbalance, which is the biggest in absolute terms. And then, of course, in Europe, you've had the Ukraine-Russia war. You've had a change in the energy picture in particular, essentially a Europe that's gone from being able to import cheap gas and oil from Russia to one that now is increasingly relying on those imports from the US, much higher, much more expensive rate. So, Germany in particular, I think, is, although it's facing a lower reciprocal tariff, would be, is certainly under the gun in this kind of environment.
It seems to me that some nations are particularly exposed, and one I think about is Denmark, with Novo Nordisk and Ozempic, which really now dominates the Danish economy. Another one would be Vietnam, which of course has created manufacturing off the back of very cheap labour. Same would be said for Bangladesh, which is now making many of the clothes for the world for many of the major multinational companies. These are the type of nations that could be well affected because they do have massive trade surpluses with the United States. And of course, these tariffs do change everything for them.
Ross, I'm tempted to tongue-in-cheek say that Denmark has a very good bargaining chip vis-a-vis the US, and you know what I'm referring to there, Greenwood. But sort of jokes aside, yeah, certainly one, Vietnam you mentioned, and of course he was referred to in the previous segment. How did the administration come up with these reciprocal tariffs? And of course the Vietnam one at 45% or even more is stood out. And of course, again, there's sort of a history there as well. Does it look good for the US to be bashing on the Vietnamese economy? That's another sort of geopolitical angle, historic angle. But, basically the way these tariffs seem to have been determined or arrived at is essentially the size of the deficit. And so if you've got a bigger deficit vis-a-vis the US, or, again, surplus from their point of view is deficit from the US point of view, you're getting hammered. But one thing to bear in mind, I think, when looking at who is going to suffer is also the key question of how long-lived are these tariffs going to be. And I'm sort of in the camp that sees them as being part of a typical Trump bargaining protocol, which is you find a tool a source of leverage, you use that leverage to extract concessions, and then if you get the concessions, then you don't have to go through on the leverage. So in this context, it would mean threaten high tariffs, put them in place, wait for the countries to line up to then negotiate and engage. And if they give ground, now the question is, how do you do that? That's a little bit more complicated,
Yes.
particularly with non-tariff barriers. But so who is better placed to kind of come out better on the other end of this process? And I think if we look forward to 3 or 6 months, I think you'll probably see some countries that are still facing high tariffs, either because they've retaliated, maybe China's in that basket, or they aren't able to really give ground to the US. But countries like Japan, for example, I think will be able to navigate the process much better because they'll be able to say, well, we've been building plants in the US, we've been investing there for a long time.
Yes.
Yeah, we can increase that. And perhaps get some of the pressure off their backs.
And just very quickly, these tariffs have come on very quickly. Can they so easily be lifted even by future regimes in America?
Well, I don't think we'll have to wait for future regimes, Ross. The president can take them away pretty much on a dime. And I think that's part of the attraction of this tariff tool, is that President Trump has discovered, he's been facing lawfare. He's been,
Yes.
He has to worry about the Congress. But this is a tool that he feels he can pretty much use freely. He puts it in place freely. He'll be able to take it away. So
Indeed.
I think we'll see action on that front pretty quickly.
I'll tell you what, Paul Sheard, it's great to have you on the program today. Always good to talk to you. Many thanks for your time.